The battlefield stretched endlessly before them, a desolate expanse of cracked earth and jagged rocks under a sky painted orange by the twin suns overhead. The air was thick with tension, heavy enough to make breathing feel like an effort. Soldiers moved cautiously among the ruins of what had once been a thriving alien city, their boots crunching against the dry ground. Their armor gleamed faintly in the sunlight, reflecting the last rays of daylight before night fell on this barren planet. They were ready, or as ready as anyone could be for something like this. Daniel Carter stood near the edge of the formation, his rifle slung over one shoulder, and his fingers brushing lightly against the hilt of the sword strapped to his side. It wasn't standard issue. No one else carried anything like it. To most of his comrades, it looked out of place. A relic, from another time, unworthy of the advanced weaponry they relied on, but Daniel knew better. He had carried that sword with him for years, ever since his grandfather passed it down to him. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a piece of history, a reminder of where humanity came from and how far it had come. And, today, he couldn't shake the feeling that it might mean more than anyone realized. Beside him, Rachel Myers adjusted her visor, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. Her sharp eyes darted back and forth, taking in every detail. She was shorter than Daniel, with dark hair tied tightly into a bun at the base of her neck. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You think they're watching us?" she asked without looking at him. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he squinted into the distance, trying to see past the haze of dust kicked up by the wind. "They're here," he said finally, his tone low but steady. They wouldn't miss this chance. Rachel glanced at him then, her brow furrowing, slightly. There was something about the way he spoke, calm, almost detached, that made her uneasy. Most people would have been terrified, knowing what was coming. The Krillian horde wasn't just some random enemy force. They were brutal, relentless, and nearly impossible to defeat. Their insectoid bodies were covered in hardened exoskeletons that could shrug off bullets, and their sheer numbers often overwhelmed even the best trained soldiers. Humanity had fought hard to hold its ground in the galaxy. But this felt different. This felt final. "You okay?" Rachel asked after a moment, lowering her voice so only he could hear. Daniel nodded, though his expression remained unreadable. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" He hesitated, glancing down at the sword again. "About why I brought this thing along." Rachel followed his gaze, her lips pressing into a thin line. She had seen the sword before, of course. Everyone had. It was hard not to notice when someone carried something so unusual into battle. But she had never asked about it, partly because it seemed personal, and partly because she didn't want to encourage whatever strange attachment Daniel clearly had to it. Still, curiosity got the better of her now. "Do you really think it'll help?" she asked skeptically. "Against those things?" Daniel shrugged, his hand lingering on the hilt. "I don't know. Maybe. My grandfather always said it was special, that it had power." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Power? Like magic or something?" "No," Daniel replied quickly, shaking his head. "Not magic. Something else. I don't fully understand it myself, but—" He trailed off, his voice dropping even lower. "I've felt it. Sometimes when I touch it, it's like, I don't know, like it's alive." Rachel stared at him for a long moment, unsure whether to laugh or take him seriously. Finally, she settled on neither. "Well, let's hope it's worth lugging around," she said dryly, "because if we're going down, I'd rather go out with guns blazing than swinging some fancy knife." Daniel chuckled softly, though there wasn't much humor in it. Fair point. For a while, neither of them spoke. The rest of the squad was busy preparing for the inevitable attack, checking weapons, setting up defensive positions, exchanging nervous glances. No one wanted to admit it, but fear hung over them like a storm cloud. Even the veterans who had seen their fair share of battles couldn't hide the tension in their movements. This wasn't just another skirmish. This was everything. If they lost here, humanity might lose the war, and possibly its future. As the minutes dragged on, the silence grew heavier. The twin suns dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape. The wind picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of sulfur from the planet's surface. Somewhere in the distance, a low rumble echoed, too deep to be thunder. It sent shivers down Rachel's spine. "They're moving," she said suddenly, her voice tight. "I can feel it." Daniel nodded, his grip tightening on the sword. "Get ready." Sure enough, the first signs of the enemy appeared moments later. At first it was just a shadow, flickering briefly on the horizon, then another, and another. Soon the entire landscape seemed to shift, as though the ground itself were rising to meet them. Thousands of Krillians poured over the hills, their massive forms silhouetted against the fading light. Their chitinous armor glinted menacingly, and their multifaceted eyes reflected the glow of the setting suns. They moved with terrifying precision, their claws clicking together in unison as they advanced. The humans froze, caught between awe and terror. These creatures weren't just soldiers. They were monsters, bred for war and destruction. Their leader, Zorvak, towered above the rest, his body adorned with spikes and glowing runes that pulsed with an eerie energy. His presence alone was enough to make even the bravest soldier hesitate. A message crackled over the comms, breaking the stunned silence. "Surrender now, humans," Zorvak's voice boomed, dripping with malice. "Your resistance is futile. We are the end of your kind." Rachel clenched her fists, her jaw tightening. "Not today, Bugface," she muttered under her breath. Around them, the squad snapped into action, raising their weapons and bracing for impact. Orders flew back and forth, but Daniel barely heard them. His focus was entirely on the approaching horde and the sword at his side. Whatever happened next, he knew he would need it. When the first shots rang out, the battlefield erupted into chaos. Plasma bolts streaked through the air, lighting up the dusk like fireworks. Explosions rocked the ground, sending plumes of dirt and debris flying in every direction. The Krillians charged forward without hesitation, their speed and ferocity catching many of the humans off guard. Within moments, the front lines crumbled, forcing the survivors to fall back. Amidst the carnage, Daniel remained eerily calm. He drew the sword slowly, the faint glow of its blade cutting through the smoke and dust. For a brief second, the world seemed to pause. The gunfire faltered, the screams faded, and even the Krillians hesitated, staring at the shimmering weapon in disbelief. And then, with a single step forward, Daniel changed the tide of the battle, for better or worse. Years before the war, long before Daniel Carter ever set foot on Vyrath 7 or faced the Krillian horde, he was just a boy growing up in a quiet town on Earth. It wasn't anything special, just rows of modest houses surrounded by fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. Life there was simple, predictable even. But for Daniel, it had been home, and home meant memories. Memories of his grandfather. His grandfather, William, had been a man of few words but countless stories. He had lived through some of humanity's darkest days. The early days of space exploration when colonies were fragile, resources were scarce, and survival was never guaranteed. William had been one of the pioneers who helped build those first outposts on the moon, mining its surface for materials that would later be used to construct ships and weapons. And among those materials, he claimed, was something extraordinary. It all started with a single shard, a fragment of an unknown mineral discovered deep within a lunar crater. The scientists couldn't explain it. It didn't match any known element, and its properties defied logic. It glowed faintly, pulsed with warmth when touched, and seemed almost alive. Some dismissed it as a curiosity, while others whispered about its potential. But William saw something more. He believed it held power, not just physical but symbolic, a reminder of what humanity could achieve when pushed to its limits. Using scraps salvaged from old mining equipment and fragments of the mysterious mineral, William forged a sword. It wasn't perfect, the blade was uneven in places, and the hilt was crude compared to modern standards, but it was strong, resilient, and unlike anything anyone had ever seen. When held under the light, the metal shimmered with an ethereal glow as if it carried a piece of the stars themselves. William called it the Legacy Blade, though no one outside the family understood why. To him, it represented hope, a testament to humanity's ability to adapt, survive, and overcome. When Daniel turned 16, William handed the sword over to him during a quiet ceremony in their backyard. There were no speeches, no formalities, just the two of them standing beneath a sky filled with stars. "This belongs to you now," William said, his voice gruff but kind. "Take care of it. Learn from it. And remember, it's not just a weapon." Daniel didn't fully understand what his grandfather meant at the time. He admired the sword, of course, but he also found it strange. Why give such an outdated tool to someone destined to fight with lasers and plasma rifles? Still, he accepted it with pride, vowing to honor his grandfather's wishes. As the years passed, Daniel grew into a soldier, enlisting in the United Federation's military as soon as he came of age. The sword stayed with him, tucked away in a protective case whenever he traveled. Most of his comrades thought it was odd, maybe even foolish, to carry something so impractical into battle. But Daniel never wavered. Deep down, he felt connected to it in a way he couldn't explain. Sometimes, late at night when the barracks were silent, he'd take it out and hold it, running his fingers along the cool, smooth surface. It always gave him a sense of calm, as if it were whispering secrets only he could hear. That connection became stronger after Rachel joined his unit. She was sharp, quick-witted, and fiercely loyal, everything a soldier should be. They clicked instantly, forming a bond that went beyond mere camaraderie. Over time, she became his closest friend, the person he trusted most. But even she didn't fully grasp his attachment to the sword. One evening, during a rare break between missions, they sat together near the edge of their base camp, watching the sunset paint the horizon in shades of gold and crimson. Rachel leaned back on her elbows, her helmet resting beside her. "You ever think about retiring?" she asked casually, breaking the silence. Daniel glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Retiring? Not really. Why?" She shrugged, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I don't know. Just wondering if there's anything else out there for us. Something besides this." She gestured vaguely at the sprawling tents and armored vehicles. Around them, he smiled faintly. "What, you tired of saving the galaxy already?" "Saving the galaxy?" Rachel snorted, rolling her eyes. "Try surviving it. That's more like it." They both laughed, but the humor faded quickly, replaced by a shared understanding of how heavy their lives had become. War changed people, shaping them in ways they couldn't undo. For Daniel, the sword was a lifeline, a tether to something simpler, purer. He reached for it instinctively, pulling it from its case and holding it up to the fading light. Rachel watched him closely, her expression softening. "Does it bother you?" she asked after a moment. "Carrying that thing around, I mean. People talk, you know." "I know," Daniel replied without hesitation. "But it doesn't matter what they say this." He paused, searching for the right words. "It means something to me. Something bigger than just being a soldier." Rachel tilted her head, studying the blade. Its glow was faint but unmistakable, casting a warm hue across Daniel's face. "Do you think it actually does something, or is it just sentimental value?" Daniel hesitated, unsure how to answer. He had spent years pondering the same question, testing the sword in secret whenever he could. Once, during a training exercise, he swung it at a target drone and swore he felt a surge of energy ripple through the air. Another time, while repairing equipment in low gravity, he noticed the sword seemed lighter, almost buoyant, as if it resisted the pull of the planet below. These moments were fleeting, hard to measure or prove, but they left an impression. "I don't know," he admitted, finally. "Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's everything. All I know is I feel different when I'm holding it, like I can do more. Be more." Rachel didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached out cautiously, brushing her fingertips against the flat of the blade. To her surprise, it hummed softly beneath her touch, sending a subtle vibration up her arm. Her eyes widened and she pulled her hand back quickly. "Okay," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "That was weird," Daniel chuckled, though there was a note of seriousness in his tone. "Told you." For a while, neither of them spoke. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the landscape into twilight. Crickets chirped in the distance, their song blending with the distant hum of machinery. Rachel broke the silence first. "If we're going to keep fighting, and let's face it, we are, you need to promise me something." "What's that?" Daniel asked, raising an eyebrow. "That you'll use it," she said firmly, nodding toward the sword. "Not just carry it around like some lucky charm. If it can help us win, then you owe it to everyone to try." Daniel nodded slowly, his grip tightening on the hilt. "I will," he promised. "When the time comes." Little did they know that time was closer than either of them realized. Days turned into weeks and orders arrived calling them to Vyrath 7, a desolate planet chosen as the final battleground against the Krillian horde. As they prepared for deployment, Daniel packed the sword carefully, wrapping it in cloth and securing it in its case. He knew the weight of what lay ahead, but he also felt a strange sense of purpose. Whatever happened next, he was ready, or at least he hoped he was. On the transport ship en route to the planet, Rachel found him sitting alone, staring out a viewport at the endless void of space. She slid into the seat beside him, her presence grounding him. "Nervous?" she asked quietly. "A little," Daniel admitted, turning to look at her. "But I think we're supposed to be here, like this is where it all leads." Rachel frowned, puzzled. "Supposed to be here? What makes you say that?" He hesitated, glancing down at the case resting on his lap. "I don't know. It's just a feeling, like the sword brought us here for a reason." Rachel sighed, shaking her head. "Sometimes I wonder if you're crazy, Daniel. But if you're right." She trailed off, her voice softening. "Then I'm glad I'm with you." They shared a brief smile before returning to their preparations, each lost in their own thoughts. Neither of them could have predicted the chaos that awaited them on Vyrath 7, or the role the sword would play in shaping their fate. But as the ship descended through the planet's atmosphere, Daniel felt a spark of determination ignite within him. Whatever happened next, he would face it head-on with the legacy blade by his side. The transport ship shuddered as it broke through the atmosphere of Vyrath 7, its engines roaring in protest against the planet's harsh winds. Inside, the soldiers gripped their seats tightly, bracing themselves for the rough landing ahead. The air was thick with tension, a mix of fear and determination etched on every face. For most of them, this mission felt like walking into the mouth of a beast. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting for survival, not just for themselves, but for humanity itself. Daniel sat near the back of the cabin, his eyes closed as he tried to steady his breathing. The weight of the sword's case rested against his knees, a constant reminder of the promise he had made. To Rachel, to his grandfather, and to himself. He wasn't sure if he believed in destiny or fate, but something about this moment felt inevitable. It was as though all the choices he'd made, all the battles he'd fought, had led him here, to this place, to this fight. Rachel sat across from him, her gaze fixed on the viewport as the barren landscape of Vyrath 7 came into view. The planet was a wasteland, its surface scarred by centuries of conflict. Jagged cliffs rose like broken teeth against the horizon, and rivers of ash snaked through valleys littered with the remnants of ancient wars. The twin suns cast long shadows over the terrain, painting everything in hues of orange and red. It was beautiful in a haunting way, but there was no time to appreciate it. Not when death loomed so close. As the ship touched down with a jarring thud, the squad sprang into action. Orders were barked, weapons checked, and positions assigned. Daniel and Rachel moved together, falling into step as they exited the ship. The air outside was dry and acrid, carrying the faint scent of sulfur. Dust swirled around their boots as they joined the rest of the unit, forming a defensive perimeter around the landing zone. Their commanding officer, a grizzled veteran named Captain Lewis, stood at the center of the group, his voice cutting through the wind. Listen up. Intel says the Krillians are massing to the east. We hold this position until reinforcements arrive. If we lose this ground, we lose the war. Understood? A chorus of affirmatives answered him, though the uncertainty in their voices betrayed their confidence. Everyone knew the odds were stacked against them. The Krillian horde wasn't just another enemy. They were relentless, brutal, and nearly impossible to kill. Their exoskeletons could withstand most human weapons, and their sheer numbers often overwhelmed even the best-trained soldiers. This wasn't going to be an easy fight. It might not even be a winnable one. Rachel glanced at Daniel as they took their positions, her expression grim. You ready for this? She asked, her tone light but her eyes serious. As ready as I'll ever be, Daniel replied, adjusting the strap of his rifle. His hand brushed against the hilt of the sword, and he felt a strange warmth radiating from it. It wasn't unpleasant, more like reassurance. Whatever happened next, he knew the sword would play a part. For hours, they waited. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional gust of wind or the distant rumble of thunder. The anticipation gnawed at everyone, making each passing second feel like an eternity. Then, just as the first hints of twilight began to creep across the sky, the comms crackled to life. This is Patrol Unit Delta. Hostiles sighted moving toward our position. Estimated arrival in 5 minutes. The announcement sent a ripple of unease through the ranks. Soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. And then they saw it. A shadow, flickering, briefly against the backdrop of the setting suns. Then another, and another. Soon the entire landscape seemed to shift, as though the ground itself were rising to meet them. Thousands of Krillians poured over the hills, their massive forms silhouetted against the fading light. Their chitinous armor gleamed menacingly, reflecting the glow of the twin suns. Claws clicked together in unison, creating a sound that sent shivers down spines. At the front of the horde stood Zorvak, their leader, towering above the rest. His body was adorned with spikes and glowing runes that pulsed with an eerie energy. His presence alone was enough to make even the bravest soldier hesitate. A message crackled over the comms, breaking the stunned silence. Zorvak's voice boomed, dripping with malice. Surrender now, humans. Your resistance is futile. We are the end of your kind. Rachel clenched her fists, her jaw tightening. Not today, Bugface, she muttered under her breath. Around them, the squad snapped into action, raising their weapons and bracing for impact. Orders flew back and forth, but Daniel barely heard them. His focus was entirely on the approaching horde and the sword at his side. Whatever happened next, he knew he would need it. When the first shots rang out, the battlefield erupted into chaos. Plasma bolts streaked through the air, lighting up the dusk like fireworks. Explosions rocked the ground, sending plumes of dirt and debris flying in every direction. The Krillians charged forward without hesitation, their speed and ferocity catching many of the humans off guard. Within moments, the front lines crumbled, forcing the survivors to fall back. Amidst the carnage, Daniel remained eerily calm. He drew the sword slowly, the faint glow of its blade cutting through the smoke and dust. For a brief second, the world seemed to pause. The gunfire faltered, the screams faded, and even the Krillians hesitated, staring at the shimmering weapon, in disbelief. Zorvak stepped forward, his multifaceted eyes narrowing as he studied the sword. What mockery is this? He growled, his voice laced with contempt. A primitive relic against our might? Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he tightened his grip on the hilt, feeling the warmth spread through his fingers. The sword hummed, softly, almost imperceptibly, as if responding to his resolve. Around him, the humans exchanged confused glances, unsure what to make of the sudden stillness. Rachel was the first to break the silence. Daniel, she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible over the wind. "What are you doing?" He glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. "Something has to change," he said simply. Before anyone could stop him, Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between the retreating humans and the advancing Krillians. The sword's glow intensified, casting a soft light across the battlefield. For a moment it felt as though time itself had slowed. Every heartbeat echoed in Daniel's ears, every breath felt deliberate and measured. He raised the sword high, pointing it directly at Zorvac. "You want us to surrender?" Daniel called out, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Then come and take it." Zorvac let out a guttural roar, signaling his troops to charge, but before they could move, a pulse of energy rippled outward from the sword, knocking several Krillians off their feet. The humans gasped in shock, their weapons lowering instinctively as they watched the impossible unfold. Rachel stared at Daniel, her eyes wide with disbelief. What is that thing?" she stammered. Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he swung the sword in a wide arc, releasing another wave of energy that disintegrated a cluster of drones hovering nearby. The Krillians froze, their confidence wavering for the first time. Even Zorvac seemed taken aback, his glowing runes flickering uncertainly. "Retreat!" Zorvac bellowed, his voice tinged with anger and confusion. "Regroup!" The order sent. A ripple through the horde, and the Krillians began pulling back, their retreat as swift and organized as their advance had been. The humans watched in stunned silence, unable to believe what had just happened. Rachel turned to Daniel, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know," Daniel admitted, lowering the sword. His hands were shaking and sweat dripped down his forehead. The effort had clearly taken a toll on him, but there was no mistaking the triumph in his eyes. "But I think we just bought ourselves some time." As the dust settled and the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of what had happened sank in. The sword wasn't just a relic, it was a weapon unlike anything humanity had ever seen. And Daniel Carter, a soldier who had once been just another name on a roster, had become something more, something extraordinary. But the battle wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. The battlefield was eerily quiet now, the chaos replaced by a tense stillness. The humans stood frozen in place, their weapons lowered, but their eyes wide with disbelief. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as if the entire world had paused, waiting for someone to make sense of what had just happened. Daniel stood at the center of it all, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. The sword in his hand glowed faintly, its light dimming with each passing second. He felt drained, physically and mentally, but also strangely alive, like every nerve in his body was on fire. His hands trembled slightly as he tightened his grip on the hilt, trying to steady himself. Around him, his comrades stared, their expressions a mix of awe, fear, and confusion. Rachel was the first to break the silence. She stepped closer to Daniel, her boots crunching softly against the dry ground. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, as if she were afraid to disturb the fragile calm. What just happened?" she asked, her eyes darting between the sword and Daniel's face. Daniel shook his head slowly, his gaze fixed on the glowing blade. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice hoarse from the effort. I acted. Something inside me told me to draw it." Rachel frowned, her brow furrowing as she processed his words. "You mean you didn't plan this? You didn't know it would do whatever that was?" "No," Daniel replied firmly, though there was a flicker of doubt in his tone. "Not exactly. I mean, I've always felt something about it. Like it had power, but I never imagined—" He trailed off, unable to find the right words. Rachel crossed her arms, her skepticism returning despite everything she had just witnessed. "Power? Like magic or something? Come on, Daniel, that's not real." "It's not magic," Daniel said quickly, shaking his head. "It's different. It's hard to explain. But you saw it, Rachel. You saw what it did." She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself. There was no denying what had happened. The Krillians, the same creatures who had slaughtered entire armies without hesitation, had retreated. They had fallen back because of Daniel and the sword. Whatever It wasn't normal. Captain Lewis approached them then, his expression unreadable. The grizzled veteran had seen countless battles, but nothing like this. He studied the sword carefully, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Carter, care to explain what that thing is?" All eyes turned to Daniel, and he felt the weight of their stares pressing down on him. He hesitated, unsure how much to say. Should he tell them about his grandfather? About the stories and legends tied to the sword? Or should he keep it simple, stick to what they could see and understand? In the end, he chose the latter. "It's a family heirloom," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves gnawing at him. "My grandfather gave it to me. He said it was special, that it had significance." I didn't fully believe him until now. Lewis raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Significance? You mean it can blow up enemy drones and send aliens running for cover?" "I don't know how it works," Daniel admitted, frustration creeping into his tone. "But it does, and if we're going to survive this, we need to figure out why." The captain didn't respond immediately. Instead, he glanced around at the rest of the squad, whose faces mirrored his own uncertainty. These were soldiers trained to rely on logic and technology, not ancient relics and unexplained phenomena. But logic hadn't saved them moments ago. The sword had. "All right," Lewis said finally, his voice carrying a note of resignation. "We'll deal with this later. For now, let's focus on holding our position. Reinforcements are still hours away, and we can't count on that thing," he nodded toward the sword, "to bail us out again." Daniel nodded, though relief washed over him. At least Lewis wasn't dismissing the sword outright. For now, that was enough. As the captain returned to organizing the troops, Rachel pulled Daniel aside, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You okay?" she asked, her concern evident. He nodded, though his exhaustion was clear. "Yeah, just tired." "You look it," she said bluntly, studying him closely. "Whatever that sword did, it took a lot out of you." "It did," Daniel agreed, rubbing his temples. "But it's worth it if it keeps us alive." Rachel sighed, her expression softening. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "That you won't go charging off alone next time," she said firmly. "If you're going to use that thing, you're not doing it without backup. Got it?" Daniel smiled faintly, grateful for her protectiveness. "Got it." They shared a brief moment of understanding before turning their attention back to the task at hand. The Krillians might have retreated, but everyone knew it was only temporary. Zorvak wouldn't give up so easily, and when he returned, he'd bring everything he had. Hours passed, and the tension on the battlefield grew heavier with each minute. The humans worked tirelessly to fortify their position, setting up barricades and laying traps in preparation for the inevitable counterattack. Despite the sword's earlier display, no one dared to lower their guard. If anything, they were more alert than ever, knowing the stakes had been raised. Daniel stayed close to Rachel, helping wherever he could while keeping the sword within reach. Its glow had faded completely now, leaving it looking like an ordinary weapon once again. But Daniel knew better. He could still feel its presence, a faint hum resonating in the back of his mind. It was as if the sword were waiting, biding its time until it was needed again. As the night deepened, the twin suns disappeared entirely, plunging the planet into darkness. The temperature dropped sharply, and the wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of ash and sulfur. Soldiers huddled together for warmth, their breath visible in the cold air. Conversations were sparse, limited to whispered exchanges and occasional bursts of nervous laughter. Everyone was on edge, their bodies tense and their minds racing. Rachel sat beside Daniel, her rifle resting across her lap. She glanced at him occasionally, noting the way his gaze kept drifting toward the sword. "You think it's done for tonight?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," Daniel replied, his voice barely audible over the wind, "but I don't think we've seen the last of it." Rachel nodded, her thoughts mirroring his own. "Zorvak isn't the type to back down. He'll be back, and he'll come harder next time. I know, Daniel said, his jaw tightening. And when he does, we'll be ready. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant howl of the wind and the occasional crackle of static over the comms. Then suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. It started as a faint vibration, barely noticeable but quickly grew, stronger, sending ripples through the dirt and rocks. "What's that?" Rachel asked, her voice rising in alarm. Daniel scrambled to his feet, gripping the sword tightly. "They're here." Sure enough, the horizon lit up with flashes of light as the Krillians launched another assault. This time, they came with reinforcements, massive siege engines rolling forward alongside waves of infantry. Their glowing runes pulsed brighter than before, casting an eerie light over the battlefield. At the forefront stood Zorvak, his towering form radiating anger and determination. "Humans!" His voice boomed, echoing across the desolate landscape. "Your trickery will not save you. Surrender now or face annihilation." Rachel cursed under her breath, raising her rifle. "Guess we're doing this the hard way." Daniel nodded, stepping forward once again. The sword began to glow, its light cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Around him the humans rallied, their fear giving way to resolve. They might not understand the sword's power, but they trusted Daniel, and that was enough. As the Krillians charged, the battle resumed with even greater ferocity than before. Plasma bolts streaked through the air, explosions rocked the ground, and screams filled the night. But amidst the chaos, Daniel stood tall, the sword blazing in his hands. With each swing, it unleashed waves of energy that tore through the enemy, ranks forcing them to retreat once again. This time, however, Zorvak didn't fall back. Instead, he stepped forward, his claws clicking menacingly as he locked eyes with Daniel. "You dare challenge me, human?" he growled, his voice dripping with venom. "Then let us see if your relic can match my strength." Daniel tightened his grip on the sword, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know if he could defeat Zorvak, not alone, but he also knew there was no turning back. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, meeting the alien leader's gaze. "Let's find out," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. And with that, the two clashed, their battle lighting up the night sky like a second sunrise. The clash between Daniel and Zorvak was like nothing anyone had ever seen. It wasn't just a fight, it was a spectacle, a collision of two forces that seemed almost otherworldly. Zorvak lunged first, his massive claws slicing through the air, with terrifying speed. The sound they made was deafening, like metal scraping against stone, and the ground cracked beneath his weight as he moved. For a creature so large, he was surprisingly quick, his movements fluid and calculated. Daniel barely managed to dodge the first strike, the wind from Zorvak's claws ruffling his hair as he rolled to the side. He came up swinging, the sword, glowing brighter than ever as it met Zorvak's armored forearm. A burst of energy erupted from the blade, sending sparks flying in all directions. Zorvak stumbled back, his runes flickering wildly as though they were struggling to contain the force of the impact. But he didn't fall. Instead, he let out a guttural roar, his anger fueling his next attack. Rachel watched from a distance, her rifle raised but useless in this situation. She wanted to help, to do something, anything. But she knew better than to interfere. This was Daniel's fight now, and the sword seemed to respond only to him. Still, her heart raced as she tracked their movements, her eyes darting between the two combatants. Every time Zorvak swung, she flinched, expecting the worst, and every time Daniel countered, she felt a surge of hope, but also fear. The strain on him was obvious. His breaths came in ragged gasps, and sweat dripped down his face despite the cold night air. "You cannot win!" Zorvak snarled, swiping at Daniel again. This time his claws grazed the soldier's arm, tearing through his armor and leaving a deep gash. Blood seeped through the fabric, staining the ground beneath him. Daniel gritted his teeth against the pain, refusing to let it slow him down. He adjusted his grip on the sword, feeling its hum grow stronger in response to his determination. "I don't need to win," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I just need to keep fighting." With that, he launched himself forward, driving the sword toward Zorvak's chest. The alien leader blocked the blow with one of his forearms, the blade sparking violently against his exoskeleton. But the force of the strike sent him stumbling backward once more, his footing faltering for the first time. The humans watching cheered, their voices rising above the din of battle. Even Captain Lewis allowed himself a brief moment of relief, though his expression remained grim. "Keep pushing," he shouted to the rest of the squad. "We hold the line." Encouraged by Daniel's success, the soldiers redoubled their efforts, firing relentlessly at the Krillian horde. The siege engines advanced slowly, their massive treads grinding against the rocky terrain, but the humans managed to disable several of them with well-placed explosives. Still, the enemy numbers were overwhelming, and fatigue was beginning to take its toll. Back in the center of the battlefield, Daniel and Zorvak continued their brutal duel. Each swing of the sword sent waves of energy rippling outward, forcing Zorvak to retreat further. But the alien leader wasn't giving up. With every step backward, he grew angrier, his glowing runes pulsating with increasing intensity. Finally, he unleashed a devastating counterattack, slamming both claws into the ground with enough force to create a shockwave that knocked Daniel off his feet. The sword flew from his grasp, skittering across the dirt several yards away. Daniel landed hard, the wind knocked out of him as he struggled to rise. Pain shot through his injured arm and his vision blurred momentarily. Through the haze, he could see Zorvak looming over him, his claws raised high for the killing blow. "No!" Rachel screamed, breaking into a sprint toward them. She fired her rifle repeatedly, aiming for Zorvak's head, but the bullets bounced harmlessly off his thick exoskeleton. Her heart sank as she realized she couldn't reach him in time. But then something incredible happened. As Zorvak prepared to strike, the sword began to glow again, brighter than before. Its light pulsed rhythmically, as if it were alive and reacting to Daniel's peril. Without hesitation, Daniel reached out toward it, his fingers brushing against the hilt even though it was still too far away to touch. To everyone's astonishment, the sword lifted off the ground, hovering briefly before flying straight into his hand. Zorvak froze mid-swing, his multifaceted eyes widening in disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered, his voice laced with both awe and fury. Daniel didn't waste a second. With the sword firmly in his grip, he surged to his feet, channeling every ounce of strength he had left into one final strike. He swung the blade upward with all his might, releasing a torrent of energy that engulfed Zorvak completely. The alien leader let out an ear-splitting shriek as the light consumed him, his body disintegrating into ash that scattered on the wind. For a moment, there was silence, absolute deafening silence. Everyone, humans and Krillians alike, stared in stunned disbelief at the spot where Zorvak had stood just moments earlier. Then, as if waking from a trance, the remaining Krillians began to retreat, their confidence shattered without their leader to guide them. Rachel ran to Daniel's side, grabbing his uninjured arm to steady him. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "I'm fine," he replied, though his legs wobbled beneath him. "Just tired." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "You did it, Daniel. You actually did it," he shook his head, his gaze fixed on the sword. "No, it did." Around them, the humans erupted into cheers, their exhaustion forgotten in the wake of victory. Captain Lewis approached, his expression a mix of pride and bewilderment. "Carter," he said, his voice gruff but sincere, "whatever that thing is, we owe you, and everything." Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he looked out over the battlefield, taking in the devastation around him. Bodies littered the ground, both human and Krillian, and the air was thick, with smoke and dust. The cost of this victory was high, far higher than anyone could have imagined. But they had won. Against all odds, they had survived. As the adrenaline began to fade, the full weight of what had happened settled over Daniel. He had faced death head-on and emerged victorious, but it hadn't been easy. The sword had saved him, yes, but it had also demanded something in return. He could feel it, the toll it had taken on his body, his mind, his very soul. It was powerful, yes, but it wasn't limitless. And neither was he. "Let's get back to the others," Rachel said gently, pulling him toward the group. "We've got a lot to figure out." Daniel nodded, allowing her to lead him away. As they walked, he glanced down at the sword one last time. Its glow had dimmed significantly, leaving it looking almost ordinary once again. But Daniel knew better. Whatever secrets it held, whatever power it possessed, it wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot, and neither was he.